began with the sound of crystal. That faint, expensive chime when my mother tapped her glass to announce something important. Around the table, forks froze midair, conversations stopped, and every eye turned toward her. "Tonight," she said, voice bright and smooth like champagne, "we celebrate both success and legacy." I knew what that meant. Success was Marcus. Legacy was my father, and I was the space between them, quiet, polite, and strategically invisible. The dining room glowed in a golden haze. My father believed lighting determined respect, so he always made sure our guests could see the marble floors, the silver cutlery, and the stone name carved into every wall. The chandelier above the table glittered like it wanted to blind me. Marcus sat across from me, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile the kind that made people trust him instantly. The air of Stone Holdings, the golden child. I was the lawyer daughter who'd chosen independence. In my father's words, that meant not profitable. "Marcus will take over the East Coast branch next quarter," father announced. The applause came too easily, relatives, business partners, family friends, all smiling at the promise of another generation of Stones running the empire. My mother reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it like he had just won a war. "Your father and I couldn't be prouder." Then her gaze shifted to me. "And Tiana's back from Seattle for the weekend," she added, her tone half warm, half formal. "Our little globetrotter." A polite laugh spread across the table. I smiled because that was what I was trained to do. "Seattle treating you well?" someone asked. "It's quieter," I said. "People are kind." "Kindness doesn't pay the bills," my father replied before sipping his wine. Laughter again, small, uncomfortable, the kind that fills a room when no one wants to challenge him. I focused on my plate. The steak was perfect, medium rare, just how my father liked it. I hadn't chosen my preference in years. When dessert came, the real reason for dinner arrived. My father pulled a black leather folder from his briefcase. Yes, he brought one to dinner and placed it right in front of me. "I need your signature," he said, as if it were a toast. "A minor guarantee for the Seattle expansion. You'll be proud to know it's partly your market." My fingers froze around my fork. "A guarantee? Purely procedural," he said, smiling. "Just a show of good faith for the banks." Marcus leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "It's nothing, T, just paperwork. Dad does this all the time." I looked down at the folder. The company's seal of Stone Holdings gleamed gold in the candlelight. I didn't even have to open it to know what kind of document it was. "Can I read it first?" I asked. My father gave a soft, almost amused chuckle. "Of course, sweetheart. You're the lawyer after all, but do keep in mind trust is the foundation of family." That word again. Family. In his mouth, it sounded less like love and more like leverage, so I read it line after line of guarantees, liability clauses, repayment schedules. The kind of thing I handled daily at the firm in Seattle, except this one had my name printed at the bottom as guarantor. "Why me?" I asked. "You have the board, Marcus." "Because you're in Seattle," he interrupted. "The local branch trusts you, it's just optics." "Optics," I repeated. "So I'm a prop." His smile didn't fade. "A symbol of unity." Mother reached out, resting a perfectly manicured hand on my wrist. "Don't overthink, darling, it's family business. Family first always." I wanted to say family first until it costs me everything. But I didn't, because no one at that table ever listened to what I really said, only what fit their version of me, so I picked up the pen. It was silver, engraved with my father's initials. The weight of it pressed against my palm like a quiet command. I hesitated. The silence stretched long enough for my father's expression to tighten just slightly. Then I signed. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper filled my head, sharp and final. As I finished, a drop of wine from Marcus's glass landed beside my signature, a dark red bloom spreading into the paper fibers. "That's it," Father said, his tone triumphant. "A family united." I wanted to laugh, united by ink and manipulation. After dinner, the laughter continued, the kind that exists only for show. I excused myself and walked out onto the balcony. The Boston winter bit through my dress, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. Below, the city glowed cold and indifferent. I leaned against the railing, the sound of forks and conversation muffled behind the glass. Somewhere inside, my mother was probably already planning a magazine feature about the Stones, power and legacy. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. My flight back to Seattle was in 7 hours. I couldn't wait. I stayed on the balcony until my fingers went numb. The city breathing below me felt steadier than my own chest. When I slid the glass door open and stepped back into the heat of the dining room, the laughter hit like perfume. It smelled sweet and heavy and not real. My father was surrounded by men in dark suits talking about acquisitions. My mother floated between them with a smile that never touched her eyes. Marcus noticed me first and excused himself from a cluster of admirers. He came over carrying 2 small espresso cups like a peace offering. "You disappeared," he said, handing me one. I needed air. He studied my face. "Look about the papers, it is not a trap. Dad really believes it will help the West deal go through. That is all." I sipped the espresso. It tasted burnt. "You say that like you are not part of it." He glanced toward Father. "We are all part of it. That is what being a stone means." I almost laughed. Being a stone means nodding while someone else decides what your signature is worth. He set his cup down and lowered his voice. "You do not have to turn everything into a fight. Maybe stop handing me weapons then." His jaw hardened. Then, softer, "Come home next month. There is a board dinner. Be in the photo. It will help." "Help who? Exactly the family," he said, as if that word still fit. A server passed behind him with a tray of tiny lemon tarts. I took one and held it without tasting it. I pictured my name under the word guarantor and felt a thin thread pull tight inside my chest. I could almost hear it creaking. Father called out from across the room. "Tiana, a guest wants to meet you." I followed him on autopilot. He introduced me to a banker who shook my hand and spoke to my father while looking at me. He had the smile of a man who sells weather to people who already own umbrellas. When he left, Father kept me there with a gentle touch on my elbow that did not feel gentle at all. "You handled that well," he said. I breathed through my nose. "I did not handle anything. I stood here." He tilted his head, amused. "You have always been dramatic. This is not a courtroom. This is family." That word again, a polished chain. I looked him straight in the eye. "Why me?" "Because optics matter. Because you are competent. Because you owe this family more than flights to Seattle." I felt my face cool. "I do not owe you my name on debts I did not choose. This is not a debt. It is a guarantee. And if it collapses," he smiled, patient and condescending, "we do not collapse." We stood there in the golden light, father and daughter, 2 versions of the same steel cut into different shapes. He wanted me to fold. I wanted to turn and walk. Instead, I placed the untouched tart on a passing tray and gave him the one sentence he would accept. "I am flying out tonight." He nodded, victorious, because I had not argued longer. "Safe travels, Tiana." I went upstairs to the guest room where my bag was already zipped. My mother was sitting on the chaise by the window, hands folded like she was posing for a portrait only she could see. "Leaving so soon," she said. "Work." She watched me adjust the strap. "You know your father has a temper. He respects results. If you show him the firm needs you in Boston, he will be thrilled to bring you closer." I stood very still. "I have built a life in Seattle." "A pretty life," she said gently. "But proximity is power. Do not forget that." I thought of Elijah in a thrifted jacket pouring paint into small cups for the students at the community center. I thought of the quiet in my apartment when the rain softened and the train cut a silver line through the night. Power had never felt farther from love. Mother rose and smoothed the silk over her hips. "When I was your age, I believed freedom was a place. Later, I learned it is a posture." But there are poses that look like freedom and cost more than cages. Be careful which one you choose. For a breath I heard her, the real her, the woman under the pearls. Then the chandelier light touched her cheek and the rehearsal returned. I picked up my bag. "I will be careful," I said, "but not the way you mean." The driver took me to the airport through streets that remembered my name better than my parents did. I checked in without speaking. When the gate agent smiled and wished me a good night, I felt an absurd wave of gratitude, the kind you feel when someone hands you water after a long run. On the plane, I took the window seat and pressed my forehead to the glass. Boston thinned into a glittering grid. The sky took us in. I closed my eyes and counted breaths until the climb steadied and the cabin lights dimmed. I thought about the dot of wine near my signature. I rescanned the pages in my mind and searched for the clause I had missed. There was always a clause. I had built my career on finding them. My father had built his on hiding them in plain sight. When the flight attendant offered tea, I asked for plain hot water. My hands were trembling and I needed something to hold. The steam rose and blurred the cabin into soft shapes. For the first time in hours, I let myself admit it. I was afraid, not of being wrong, not of conflict. I was afraid that my life had a hinge I could not see, and that tonight I had turned it without knowing. A man in the aisle seat across from me was reading a guide to mindfulness and underlining entire paragraphs. He kept nodding at the page like the book could nod back. I wanted to ask him what sentence had saved him. I wanted to ask him if any sentence ever had. I set the cup down and pulled my phone from airplane mode just long enough to type a message. Elijah was likely asleep, but I wrote it anyway. "Flight delayed leaving Boston. Back early morning. I will call when I land. Miss your voice." I did not send it. I stared at the words until they looked like someone else. Then I deleted them and turned the phone face down. The cabin went quiet. The hum of the engines smoothed into something like a lullaby. I watched the wing tip carve a pale line against the dark. Let it be the last time, I whispered again, and this time I chose different meanings. Let it be the last time I sign what I do not believe. Let it be the last time I treat my own intuition as an inconvenience. When we landed, dawn was still figuring itself out. Seattle greeted me with wet air and the smell of cedar. I took the light rail into the city with a handful of other travelers who looked like they had come home from wars no one else could see. The apartment was exactly as I left it. A coffee cup drying on the rack. A note on the fridge that said "Buy lemons" in my quick slanted handwriting. The rain tapped the window softly, like a friend who never insists but never leaves. I showered and changed and stood barefoot on the kitchen tile while the kettle began to sing. My suitcase lay open on the floor, one strap hanging like a loose thought. I poured the water and stared at the steam until it disappeared. I took the folder from my bag and set it on the table. The seal caught the new light. I opened to the page with my name and read every line again, every number, every comma. The contract did not lie. It never does. People do. Hopes do. Need does. Halfway down the page, a sentence winked at me. A small clause near the footnote. Replacement collateral in the event of revision. 30 days. Triggered by withdrawal of guarantor. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The word withdrawal hung in the air like a door I had not noticed before. My phone buzzed. Elijah. I let it ring once, then answered. You home? I am. You sound tired. It was a show, I said. Loud and bright and full of things I did not want. You okay? I looked at the paper. I looked at the rain. I swallowed. I will be. Can I see you tonight? You can see me now, he said, and the way he said it made the morning warmer. I will bring coffee and breakfast that tastes like a hug. I smiled for the first time since the balcony. Thank you. After we hung up, I leaned both hands on the table and read the page again. The words did not move. My breath counted itself without me. 30 days, triggered by withdrawal. A small door, yes, but a real one. I closed the folder and slid it back into my bag. The room felt different. Not safer, but clearer. Outside, the rain eased and the street below woke up one car at a time. I made the bed. I opened the window an inch and let cold air carry a clean smell through the room. I told myself I had just flown across a continent to return to my life. What I did not know then was that I had flown home to a fuse already lit. Seattle smelled like rain and coffee when I landed. After the glass corridors and marble floors of Boston, the air here felt human again. It clung to my skin, damp and alive. I took the train from the airport and watched condensation bead along the window while the city unfolded in slow gray layers. The apartment was small, high enough that I could see the harbor cranes and the silver thread of the highway. I dropped my bag by the door and let silence settle over the rooms. No staff, no schedule, no one waiting for a performance, just the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of traffic below. I made coffee strong enough to sting and open my laptop. Work always steadied me. Contracts did not lie, people did. Clauses were clean, predictable, unlike conversations with my father. I spent the morning reviewing a stack of merger notes, line after line of obligations and penalties, until the ache in my shoulders told me I had been still too long. At noon, I changed into jeans and a plain white shirt and walked to the community center a few blocks away. The law firm had partnered with them for a volunteer program, free legal literacy for small business owners. It was the kind of work that reminded me why I had ever studied law in the first place. The gym smelled of floor wax and rain-soaked coats. A dozen folding chairs faced a projector screen that refused to turn on. I was halfway through coaxing the plug into life when someone's voice behind me said, "Try the outlet on the right. The left one died last week." I turned. He was carrying a box of art supplies, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair still damp from outside. His smile was unpolished but steady. Elijah Cruz, one of the teachers who used the space after hours. "You are the lawyer from downtown, right?" he asked. "That obvious only because you look like you are trying to solve the socket's childhood trauma." I laughed before I could stop myself. We fixed the connection, and the projector blinked awake. The room filled slowly with people. Baristas, shop owners, a florist who wanted to understand leases. I spoke for an hour about tenant rights and small claims procedures while Elijah arranged chairs for latecomers. When it ended, he handed me a paper cup of tea. "You talk about law like it is something alive. Maybe it is. Alive and stubborn," he nodded. "Most living things are." Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights turned the puddles gold. We walked to the corner where his car was parked, a battered hatchback that looked one apology away from retirement. "Do you always stay this late after workshops?" he asked. "Only when I forget to have dinner first. Then you are in luck. There is a place 2 blocks down that fries fish like they invented oil." I hesitated just long enough for him to smile. "You can trust me, counselor. Worst case, you sue me for bad taste." The restaurant was small, the kind of place with steamed windows and mismatched chairs. He ordered for both of us, and the table filled with paper baskets of food that smelled like salt and heat. I realized I had not eaten properly in days. He told me he had once been an architect, but left the firm after a project collapsed under political pressure. I asked if he missed it. "Sometimes," he said, "but teaching feels less like building walls and more like giving someone a door." I looked at him then, really looked. No tie, no watch worth more than rent, no ambition carved into his smile. Just a calm I had not known I was starving for. By the time we left, the streets were empty. I felt lighter, as if Boston had been another country instead of 6 hours behind. When I got home, I placed the folder from my father inside a drawer and shut it. The sound of the drawer closing felt final. I told myself it would stay there, harmless, a favor already done. Before bed, I texted Elijah, "Thanks for dinner." The food and the company were both decent. He replied almost instantly. Decent is a strong word coming from a lawyer. I will take it. I smiled at the screen, then at the rain outside the window. For the first time in years, I slept without clenching my jaw. The following week felt like breathing for the first time in years. Mornings began with the hiss of the kettle and the faint echo of seagulls outside my window. I walked to work through streets still wet from dawn rain, coffee in hand, hair pulled back without a second thought. Seattle was messy, imperfect, unpolished, and that was exactly what I needed. The office was on the 22nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the bay. I liked arriving before anyone else. The quiet gave me a sense of ownership I never had in my father's firm. I could watch the city wake up, lights switching on one by one, each window a story I did not have to manage. I buried myself in contracts until my eyes blurred. Around noon, a message popped up from Elijah. "Lunch break or hostage situation?" I smiled at the screen, negotiating peace with deadlines. His reply came a minute later. "Bring your peace treaty downstairs. There's sunlight and tacos waiting." We ate outside on the stone steps near the waterfront, the air sharp with sea salt. He talked about his students, one who wanted to design video games, another who painted entire cities in neon colors. I listened more than I spoke. The way he described people carried no judgment, only curiosity. "You do not talk much about Boston," he said at one point. I shrugged. "Some places speak too loudly even when you leave them." He nodded as if he understood exactly. Then he changed the subject to music, and the moment passed gently instead of breaking. That evening, I stopped by a bookstore on my walk home and bought a used copy of The Architecture of Happiness. The cover was torn, but the title felt like something I should learn. I placed it on the nightstand next to the folder from my father, still unopened since that first day. Days turned into a rhythm I could finally live with. Work, coffee, evening walks along the harbor, dinners with Elijah that started as friendly and grew into something quieter, steadier. He never pushed, never demanded. When he looked at me, it was not to measure but to see. One night, we sat in his small apartment while he painted, bright strokes of color on a wooden board salvaged from the school's renovation. He asked if he could paint my hands. "My hands, yes," he said. "They move like you are always writing contracts in your head. I want to see what that looks like in color." I let him. The paintbrush tickled across my skin, leaving traces of blue and white. When he finished, he said softly, "You are allowed to rest, you know." I wanted to answer, but the words stuck. Rest had always been a temporary thing in my family, a pause before the next demand. I had never known how to do it without guilt. Later, lying in bed, I thought about that line. Maybe rest was not the absence of work, but the absence of proving something. I woke before sunrise the next morning to the sound of rain tapping the window. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, an email from the family office in Boston. Subject, board dinner invitation, attendance required. The words hit harder than I expected. Required. I stared at the screen for a long time before forwarding it to Marcus with a single line, "Tell him I am busy." The reply came minutes later. "You know he will not like that. He does not have to." I set the phone down and looked out at the pale gray sky. Seattle's rain was relentless but honest. It fell the same on everyone. That honesty was starting to feel like home. When I arrived at the office, my assistant handed me a thick envelope that had been delivered by courier. My father's handwriting scrawled across the front. I took it to my desk, broke the seal, and unfolded the papers. Inside was another set of contracts, this time cleaner, newer. At the bottom, a note written in my father's curt script: family support should never require hesitation. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. The scent of ink and cedar filled the air. He still thought he could command me through paper. At lunch, Elijah noticed the tension in my shoulders. Long morning, he asked. My father found a way to deliver mail that weighs more than it should. He waited. I shook my head. It's nothing I want to feed. Then do not. His answer was simple, but it landed somewhere deep. That evening, I walked home without an umbrella, letting the rain soak through my coat. Water dripped into my eyes, and I laughed quietly, surprising myself. Freedom, I realized, rarely looked dramatic. Sometimes it was just choosing not to reply. When I reached the apartment, I placed the envelope next to the folder in the drawer. 2 sets of papers, 2 ghosts. For now, they could haunt each other. I sat by the window, watching the lights ripple across the wet streets, and whispered to no one, I am not going back. I meant it. At least, I thought I did. But storms have a way of remembering your name long after you have left their city. It started with a phone call on a Thursday morning, just as sunlight finally decided to visit Seattle after a week of rain. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed across the desk. Marcus. The name on the screen carried a weight I hadn't missed. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering. Tiana, he said, using the tone that always came before a favor. Dad wants you home next weekend. For what? Board dinner. He says it's important. Family attendance mandatory. I laughed softly. He still calls it family when it's a business dinner. He didn't answer right away. It would mean a lot if you came. To him or to you? Both. The silence that followed was familiar, shaped like every conversation we'd ever had, him the bridge, me the distance. I looked out the window. The city glimmered in pale gold, innocent of what waited behind the word mandatory. I'll think about it, I said finally. You should bring someone, he added, his voice softening. Makes things easier. I almost said easier for who, but I stopped myself. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the black glass of the laptop screen. For 3 years, I managed to build a version of life that didn't orbit around my family's gravity. But somehow, even from 2,000 miles away, their pull still reached me. That night, Elijah came over carrying Thai food and a bottle of cheap wine. He set everything on the table and studied my face. You got that look, he said. What look? The one where you're pretending not to think about something that's eating you alive. I told him about the dinner, about the tone Marcus used, about the way my father's voice could still live inside words he didn't even say. Do you want to go? He asked. I hesitated. Part of me does, the part that still wants them to see me. And the other part wants to delete the message and never look back. He nodded slowly. If I were you, I'd go, but not for them, for yourself, to see what's left. The following week passed like the slow inhale before a storm. I worked late, packed twice, unpacked once. On Friday night, Elijah helped me fold the last shirt into my suitcase. Do you want me to come? He asked. I met his eyes. You really would? Of course, if I'm part of your life, I should see where you come from. Something in his tone, steady, unafraid, untied a knot in my chest I didn't know I'd been holding. All right, I said, just don't let them scare you. He smiled. I teach teenagers for a living, I'll be fine. The flight to Boston was quiet. Elijah fell asleep halfway through, head resting against the window. I watched the city lights fade beneath the clouds and thought about the last time I had seen my father's house. Back then, I had left with a folder of contracts and the kind of silence that makes you question your own voice. This time, I promised myself would be different. When we landed, the air felt sharper, colder. The car that picked us up drove past the same rows of immaculate brownstones and glass towers, each one whispering money. The driver pulled up to the mansion's front gate, where lights shimmered like a scene from a memory I'd tried to bury. Elijah looked out the window. You grew up here. Technically, I said. Emotionally, I grew up somewhere else. Inside, everything smelled the same, cedar polish, white lilies, a trace of champagne. The walls gleamed. The piano still sat in the corner, perfectly tuned and never played. My mother appeared first, wrapped in silk and careful grace. Tiana, she said, her smile practiced. You look different. Older, independent. The word sounded like an accusation. Then she turned to Elijah. And this is Elijah Cruz, he said, shaking her hand. It's nice to meet you. Her eyes flicked over his jacket, his shoes, the faint paint stain near his cuff. She smiled, but her gaze cooled. A teacher, yes. Yes, ma'am, literature and art. How refreshing, she said lightly. My daughter always did have unconventional taste. I felt Elijah's hand brush mine under the tablecloth, a small, quiet reassurance. Dinner was a performance. My father sat at the head of the table, glass of whiskey in hand, voice filling the room like a sermon. Talked about expansion, about new investors, about legacy. Marcus played his role perfectly, smiling, agreeing, nodding at the right moments. At some point, my father turned to Elijah. "So you teach must be rewarding." "It is," Elijah said simply. "And demanding, I imagine, but not exactly lucrative." The table chuckled. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin as if to hide a smile. "Dad," I said, my tone sharper than I meant. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I'm only saying education is noble. Just not sustainable." Elijah's voice stayed calm. "It depends on what you're trying to sustain." The room stilled. My father studied him for a long moment, then laughed. "You have spirit. I can see why she likes you." My mother added softly, "Tiana always did like projects." The word cut deeper than I expected. When dessert came, I couldn't eat. The air felt heavy with the things we weren't saying. I excused myself and stepped out to the terrace, the same place I had stood 3 years earlier. Same cold wind, the same stars behind the city haze. Elijah joined me a few minutes later, coat draped over his arm. "So," he said, voice gentle, "how does it feel to be home?" "It doesn't feel like home," I said. "It feels like a museum I once lived in." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time to stop visiting." I turned toward him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You're not embarrassed, are you, by them?" "Not even a little," he said. "I'm just sad they don't realize how lucky they are." For a moment, the world went quiet except for the hum of traffic far below. I leaned against him, and for the first time that evening, breathed. Inside, laughter started again, the kind that sounds expensive but hollow. I didn't go back in. Neither did he. We stayed on the terrace until the music stopped and the lights inside dimmed, two silhouettes against a city that didn't need witnesses. When the car dropped us off at the hotel later, I took off my shoes and sat by the window, staring out at the skyline. My reflection stared back, faint and tired. "They never actually see me," I said quietly. Elijah touched my hand. "Then let them stay blind." I laughed softly, though my eyes burned. "Easier said than done." "Everything worth doing is," he said. I turned toward him and smiled for real this time, the kind that wasn't for anyone else. We slept with the window slightly open. The wind carried the scent of winter through the room, clean and cold. Somewhere between the city's pulse and Elijah's slow breathing beside me, I felt something inside me loosen. I didn't know it yet, but that looseness was the start of breaking free. Morning came pale and quiet. Boston sunlight seeped through the curtains like an apology too late to matter. Elijah was still asleep beside me, his hand draped over my arm, his breathing slow and even. For a while, I watched him and thought about how simple it was to exist when no one expected anything from you. Then my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A single message from Marcus, family breakfast, 8:30, be on time. I sighed, slipped out of bed, and stood under the shower until the water turned from warmth to ice. The mirror fogged, hiding the reflection I did not want to meet. When I stepped out, I caught sight of the suit hanging in the closet, charcoal gray, the one I had worn for every obligatory family event. I chose jeans and a black blouse instead. Let them frown. Downstairs, the dining room looked exactly as it had last night. Crystal glasses, folded napkins, the faint scent of citrus polish. My mother sat at the head of the table, phone in hand, scanning social media. My father poured coffee, his posture an emblem of composure. Marcus was already halfway through breakfast. "Tiana," father said, not looking up, "you're late." "I'm here, that's an upgrade." Marcus coughed into his cup to hide a smile. My father ignored him. "We'll be signing the final paperwork for the Korean partnership next month. It's vital that everyone understands the role they play." I sat down, taking the seat furthest from him. "And what role would that be exactly?" He glanced up at me. "You, for instance, project the firm's credibility. You're a lawyer. Your presence reassures investors. Reassures them that nepotism is alive and well." The room chilled. My mother placed her phone down slowly. "Tiana, please." I looked from one to the other. "You're using me as a face, not a partner. That's not family. That's branding." My father's voice dropped an octave. "You're part of this name whether you like it or not." "Names are just labels, Dad. They stop meaning anything when you use them as currency." He stared at me for a long second, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You sound just like your mother when she used to dream about being an artist." She flinched, almost imperceptibly. I turned toward her, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. Elijah appeared in the doorway then, his hair still damp from the shower. He gave a polite nod to the room. "Good morning." My father's expression froze, then reassembled into a smile too smooth to trust. "Ah, the teacher." Elijah smiled back. "Still am." "Interesting career choice," father said. Modest, respectable in theory, I imagine it doesn't pay enough to travel much. I spoke before Elijah could. We travel where it matters. My father's eyes shifted to me, then to him. How long have you two been? Long enough, I said. Elijah placed a calm hand on my shoulder. We should go, he said quietly. Running away already? My father asked. I stood. No, just choosing a better use of time. As we left the room, I heard my mother murmur something about embarrassment, Marcus whispering my name, my father's sigh thick as smoke. Outside, the air was thin and biting. Elijah and I walked without speaking until we reached the car. I slid into the passenger seat, gripping my knees until the tremor in my hands subsided. You okay? He asked gently. I don't know. They wanted a reaction, he said. You didn't give them one, that's progress. I let out a shaky laugh. Progress feels a lot like exhaustion. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and scanned my emails, pretending to focus on work. The cursor blinked on a blank document, impatient. Elijah unpacked quietly behind me. The silence stretched until he said, Do you want to go back tonight? No, I'll stay for the weekend. I should at least see Marcus before we leave. He nodded. I'll give you space. That evening, Marcus met me at a cafe near the Charles River. The winter wind cut through the glass, carrying the smell of smoke and water. He ordered espresso. I ordered tea I wouldn't drink. You made an impression, he said. Always do. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You know Dad won't forgive that tone. I'm not asking for forgiveness. You think you're free of this, Tiana, but you're not. You signed that loan guarantee. You're tied to him whether you like it or not. The mention of the contract hit like a blade pressed to an old scar. It's just a signature, I said carefully. He studied me. You really believe that? I looked out the window. The river was frozen near the edge, light refracting off it like glass. I want to, he sighed. You're brilliant, T, but you don't understand how he works. Everything is strategy, even family. Especially family. We sat in silence until our cups went cold. Then he said softly, For what it's worth, Elijah seems good for you. You look lighter. I almost smiled. He reminds me of who I wanted to be before I learned how to sign my life away. When we parted, I walked along the river until the sky bruised into dusk. The city glowed behind me, glass and fire and memory. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself wanted to drag me back. At the hotel, Elijah was reading by the window. He looked up when I entered. How was it? I don't think they ever see me as a person, I said. Just a reflection that should behave. He closed the book and opened his arms, then stopped standing in front of their mirror. I let him hold me until the noise in my head slowed down. The next morning, as the taxi drove us to the airport, I glanced out at the skyline one last time. My father's city looked perfect in the distance, symmetrical, untouchable. I felt something close to pity. Boston was still the same. The difference was me. I rested my head against the window as the plane lifted through the clouds, leaving behind everything polished, heavy, and scripted. Elijah reached for my hand and held it until the light above the wings swallowed the horizon. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was escaping. I felt like I was reclaiming air that had always been mine. Back in Seattle, the world returned to rhythm. Mornings filled with the smell of coffee and damp air. The city moved slower than Boston, like it had nothing to prove. I worked late, walked home past rows of glowing shop windows, and told myself that trip was over. That they no longer had a hold on me. For a while, I believed it. Elijah and I found a new pattern. We spent Sundays wandering the farmer's market, arguing over which fruit actually tasted like summer. He painted more, I read more, and the silence between us began to feel like trust instead of absence. Then one evening in early spring, I was working on a corporate acquisition file when a notification popped up on my phone. A message from my cousin Avery, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. The text was short. Can't wait to see everyone at the family summit. Montauk next weekend, right? My fingers paused above the keyboard. I scrolled up, reading it again as if the words would rearrange themselves into something else. Family summit. I hadn't heard a single word about it. I opened Instagram. The first story that appeared made my breath catch. There they were, my parents, Marcus, their spouses, my aunt, even Avery, standing on a lakefront patio surrounded by champagne glasses and golden light. The caption read, Stone Legacy, Summer Family Summit begins. I watched it twice, my thumb hovering over the screen. No mention of me, no tag, not even a quiet courtesy call. When Elijah came into the room, I must have looked strange because he stopped mid-step. What happened? I turned the phone toward him. They're all there, he frowned. You weren't invited? I shook my head. My throat tightened, heat rising behind my eyes. They didn't even tell me it existed. He sat beside me, scrolling through the images. The photos looked choreographed: linen clothes, polished smiles, sunlight bouncing off crystal glasses, the perfect image without me. Maybe it was a mistake, he said gently. It was, I swallowed hard. It's too clean, too deliberate. The next day, while editing a contract draft at the office, I saw Marcus's name flash on my phone. I almost didn't answer. Tiana, he said, voice low, I assume you've seen the photos. You think, he exhaled. Look, this wasn't my call. Whose was it? Dad's. He said it was an investor-oriented event, not family. Then why is Mom there in a sundress? He hesitated. You know how he is, optics matter. He said it was best to keep things simple. Simple, I repeated. Meaning what, Marcus? Meaning a teacher boyfriend and an independent daughter don't fit the brochure? There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, I'm sorry, T. Don't be, just stop pretending we're in the same family. I hung up before he could answer. For the rest of the day, I worked like someone trying to outrun her own heartbeat. The office lights blurred, the world reduced to words and numbers that couldn't hurt me. But underneath, the ache pulsed steady. That night, Elijah found me sitting on the kitchen floor with my laptop still open. You're not okay, he said softly. I'm fine. You're not. He crouched down. Talk to me. I looked at him for a long moment. They cut me out, officially, quietly. No announcement, no drama, just erased me from the picture. He brushed a strand of hair from my face. That says more about them than about you. I know, but knowing doesn't make it hurt less. He pulled me close until my forehead rested against his shoulder. Then let it hurt, just don't let it build walls. I didn't answer. The room smelled like rain again, and for a moment I wished I could dissolve into it. Later, when he fell asleep, I sat by the window, laptop open, the light from the screen painting my face blue. I searched through my old emails until I found it, the contract my father had sent me months ago, the one I had signed over dinner. The digital signature glowed at the bottom of the page. I scrolled slowly through the clauses, the language familiar but heavier now. My name appeared twice, once as guarantor, once in a section labeled collateral revision rights. I frowned, leaning closer. A reference number linked to another document I didn't remember signing. My pulse quickened. I searched the firm's archive for the cross-reference code. Nothing. The folder was blank. The city outside blurred into streaks of light. I stared at the contract, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered the words I didn't want to hear. It's not over. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from my father. Important business ahead. We expect discretion. That was all. No greeting, no punctuation, just a command wrapped in civility. I closed my laptop slowly. It was the first moment I felt real fear. Not the kind that comes with shouting or threats, but the quiet kind that hums beneath the surface, like a wire waiting to burn. I looked at the contract one last time, then shut the screen. Whatever they were hiding, I would find it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city was still half asleep, wrapped in fog. I made coffee without tasting it, eyes fixed on the laptop glowing on the counter. The contract sat open, its pages scrolling endlessly. Numbers, clauses, dates. Everything perfectly legal on the surface, yet something inside me screamed that it was. I searched again for that missing reference file, the one listed under collateral revision rights. The database returned nothing. No record, no metadata. It was as if the document never existed. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in my office at the firm, hair still damp, fingers tapping on the desk. My colleague Hannah passed by, raising an eyebrow. You look like you've been up all night. I've seen a ghost, I said quietly. What kind? The legal kind. She smiled, thinking I was joking. I hesitated, then opened the folder on my computer. Do me a favor, I said. Check if this loan agreement ever filed an amendment. Reference code 8ZX4532. She typed, eyes scanning the screen. After a minute, she frowned. That's odd. The code exists, but the file archived under private executive access. Who gave you clearance for that? No one, I said. She glanced at me. Tiana, if this involves your family, maybe step back. Conflict of interest and all that. Maybe, I smiled faintly. Or maybe that's why I'm the only one who can look at it. By the time the clock hit noon, my chest felt tight. I walked out of the building and into the drizzle, phone clutched in my hand. The screen showed a dozen unanswered calls from Boston, most from the family office. I didn't pick up any of them. Instead, I dialed Marcus. He answered on the second ring, sounding weary. T, please tell me you're not digging into the contracts. Then tell me why I shouldn't, he exhaled sharply. Because it's complicated. Complicated is code for guilty, I said. You forget I grew up in this family. Dad's trying to handle investors, that's all. You wouldn't understand the pressure. I understand enough to know you don't erase someone's name from a family summit unless you've already erased their purpose. He went silent. I could almost hear him rubbing his forehead, the way he did when we were kids and I caught him lying. Just don't make this worse, he said finally. Please. Worse, I laughed softly. You think I can make it worse than being erased? When I hung up, I stood on the street corner, rain soaking through my coat. Cars hissed by, their reflections sliding across the pavement. I felt a strange calm, an edge that came right before the fall. That night, Elijah came home to find me sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by papers, coffee cups, and highlighted printouts. He dropped his bag. Tell me this is not about them again. I wish I could, I said, holding up a document. But it is. He knelt beside me. Talk to me. They used my name, I said slowly. They needed me on that contract to secure the loan. But there's another file tied to it, one that was sealed under private access. I don't know what's in it, but whatever it is, they don't want me to see it. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's everything. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, You can't fight them on their turf. I'm not fighting them. I pointed at the pages. I'm just shining light on what's already there. He sighed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. You sound exactly like the woman I fell for. Stubborn, fearless, he said, but promise me something, don't let this consume you. I nodded, though we both knew I couldn't keep that promise. When he fell asleep, I sat in the dim light of the lamp, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. My eyes landed on the word guarantor, my name typed neatly below it, black ink permanent and calm. The irony stung. A contract meant to guarantee stability had become a noose, and I had tied it myself. At 2 a.m., I reopened the hidden archive portal through the firm's secure network. I wasn't supposed to. But rules were something my father had taught me to bend. I traced the access code through internal records until I found it, a signature entry time-stamped 3 months after I had left Boston. The signature was mine, except I had never signed it. I stared at it until the lines blurred. The curve of the letters was perfect, almost surgical. My pulse pounded in my ears. My father's company had filed an amendment with my forged authorization. My hands trembled as I took a screenshot and saved it to an encrypted folder. The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen, waiting. I whispered to myself, now I know why they kept me out of the picture. Outside, rain turned into hail, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. I looked out into the dark city and realized that for all my talk of freedom, I had never really escaped. I had only stepped outside their reach long enough for them to move the cage. The next morning felt heavier than usual. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, that forged signature stared back at me, a mirror that refused to lie. The morning light fell across the floor like a thin blade, slicing the room into halves. On one side, my life in Seattle, my work, my quiet mornings, Elijah. On the other, everything I thought I'd left behind. By 9, I was in my office, pacing. The city outside looked unaware, almost indifferent. I opened the file again, tracing the imitation of my handwriting. Whoever had done it knew me well. The loops, the slant, even the small hesitation before the S in stone, perfect. Too perfect. I called Hannah, my colleague and closest friend at the firm. She answered on the second ring. You're at work already? She asked. I need your help. Your tone tells me this is family. I swallowed. You could say that. Within half an hour, she was in my office, coffee in one hand, her sharp eyes scanning the monitor. That's your signature, she said. It is. She leaned in. Tiana, this is clean work. Whoever did it had access to your e-sign credentials. I never shared them, she straightened. Then someone inside your father's company forged it. That's federal territory. The word forged hung in the air like smoke. What's the document about? She asked. An amendment to a loan I guaranteed 3 years ago. They added a new collateral clause under my name. Meaning if they default, I'm responsible for over $1.5 million. Hannah went silent. Then quietly, you need to file a complaint. I stared at the screen. My father's voice echoed from memory. Family matters are not for outsiders. Filing a complaint would mean war, but staying silent would mean surrender. I closed the laptop. Not yet. By afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Marcus called twice. I ignored him both times. Then a number I didn't recognize appeared. I answered before I could think. Tiana, my brother's voice came through tight. Don't hang up, please. What do you want? We need to talk in person. About what? He hesitated. Dad knows you found the amendment. My throat went dry. Then he knows he forged it. He didn't. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, catching himself. He thought it was harmless. A technical adjustment. He panicked. Panicked? I laughed bitterly. He committed fraud, Marcus. I'm flying to Seattle tonight. Don't do anything until we speak, okay? Why? Are you bringing another contract for me to sign? Tiana, please, he said. Just wait for me. When the call ended, I sat very still. Through the window, the sky had turned the color of steel. I thought of all the nights I'd spent defending clients from corporate malpractice, the cold precision of truth in documents, and how blind I'd been to the same deceit in my own bloodline. Elijah came home to find me sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. What happened? He asked softly. My father forged my signature. He froze. What? They used my name to guarantee another loan, a new one, without telling me. He sat beside me, disbelief shadowing his face. That's criminal. Tell that to a man who thinks law bends to money. He took my hand, grounding me. You can fight this. I shook my head. It's not just about the contract, it's about everything. The manipulation. The control. I signed one paper and gave them permission to own me again. Then take it back, he said simply. I looked at him, really looked. His steadiness felt like oxygen. That night, I opened my laptop again and drafted an official request to withdraw my personal guarantee from the loan. Hannah reviewed it line by line, ensuring every clause stood airtight. Before sending it, I hesitated. Once I did this, there would be no turning back. I wasn't just rejecting my father's company, I was detonating its foundation. Elijah came to stand behind me. If you need to do it, do it. My fingers hovered over the mouse. This will hurt them, he whispered. Then maybe they'll finally feel something real. I clicked send. The email shot through the server, quiet and final. I felt the weight lift and at the same time a strange chill crawl up my spine. An hour later, the first call came from Marcus. I didn't answer. Then another. And another. The screen lit up again and again until I turned it face down. At midnight, I sat on the balcony, glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights shimmer across the bay. Elijah joined me, silent. They'll come for me, I said. I know. I don't want to hate them, but I think I might. He placed his hand over mine. Then hate what they did, not who they are. It's cleaner that way. I looked at him, the man who never asked me to prove anything, and wondered if love was supposed to feel this still, like standing in the eye of a storm, knowing everything outside was chaos, but inside there was breath. Somewhere across the country, in a glass office tower bearing the stone name, I knew my father had already read the email. I could picture him, jaw clenched, hand gripping a tumbler of whiskey, realizing for the first time that control could be lost with a single act of defiance. The storm had started, and for once I was the one who lit the match. By morning, the storm had arrived, not in the sky, but in my inbox. 23 unread messages from the Stone Holdings legal department, 5 from Marcus, 2 from my father himself. The subject lines were blunt, corporate, and cold. Urgent response required. Unauthorized withdrawal notice. Breach of contract review. I scrolled through them without opening a single one. My hands shook, not from fear but from the surge of adrenaline that came when a long-standing wall finally cracked. At 9:12 a.m., the phone rang again. This time I answered. Tiana, my father's voice thundered through the speaker. What have you done? I kept my tone even. I removed myself from a fraudulent contract. You don't understand the consequences. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. You forged my signature. He paused. You think I'd risk the company over something so small? You already did. You risked me. For a moment, all I heard was his breathing, slow, deliberate, the way he used to inhale before cutting a deal. Then came the voice I remembered from childhood, the one that filled rooms and bent people's wills. I built your life, Tiana. Every opportunity you've ever had exists because of me, and this is how you repay that. I closed my eyes. You didn't build my life, Dad. You built a cage and called it legacy. He laughed, low and dangerous. You always had your mother's temper. She thought principals could pay bills too. She also thought love didn't need contracts. The silence that followed was sharp. Then he said quietly, You're making a mistake you can't undo. Maybe, I said, but at least it's mine. He hung up first. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the phone like it might still be burning in my hand. At work, Hannah closed the office door behind her. You look like someone who just committed emotional arson. I might have, I admitted. She sat across from me. Do you want to escalate this legally? Yes, I said, but my voice came out quieter than I intended. Then we'll start with evidence. You already have the forged signature. Get everything connected to that loan. Paper trail, internal memos, anything. She gave me a look that was both stern and protective. You know this will go public if it escalates, right? A stone taking down Stone Holdings, that's not just news, it's spectacle. I nodded. I'm not afraid of light anymore. By the end of the day, I'd pulled every document I could access through old company logins. Most of it was routine financial statements, property liens, but one folder stood out. HZX internal MARCUS authorization copy. My breath hitched. Inside was a scanned file marked confidential, family review. I opened it, and there it was, the same contract, the same clause, but this time it wasn't my signature they'd forged. It was Marcus. The realization hit like a blow. He hadn't been protecting Dad, he'd been protecting himself, or maybe they'd both been victims of the same hand. When I called him, he answered instantly. Tiana, don't find out the truth? It's not what you think, he said. Then tell me what it is. He was silent. Then, almost in a whisper, he forged mine too. I sank back in my chair. Why didn't you say anything? Because he told me it would ruin us all if I did. I tried to stop him, but he said it was already done. Jesus, Marcus. He said it was just temporary, that he'd fix it before anyone noticed. And you believed him? He sighed. He's our father, I wanted to. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the city outside his line, car horns, wind, the muffled chaos of Boston. He's collapsing, T, Marcus said softly. The deals, the investors, he's desperate. You withdrawing just triggered the dominoes. Good, I said. Maybe it's time he learns what desperation feels like. That night, I told Elijah everything. We sat on the balcony as wind swept across the bay, the air electric with the promise of rain. So your father forged both signatures, he said slowly. Yes, and used them to secure over $10 million in assets. He rubbed his forehead. That's not just fraud, that's premeditated. I know. What will you do? Expose him. He looked at me carefully. Even if it destroys the company. Even if it destroys Marcus? I hesitated. I don't want to hurt Marcus, but this stops now. He nodded, eyes steady. Then I'll help you. I turned toward him. You don't have to, he smiled faintly. You forget I don't do things because I have to, I do them because I choose to. For the first time in days, I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes. You don't know what you're signing up for. I'm not signing anything, he said softly. I'm staying. We stayed out there long after the city fell silent, watching the clouds drift in from the west. Somewhere out there, I knew my father was preparing his next move, because men like him never surrendered quietly. But neither did I. The first lightning split the sky, distant but clear. I whispered into the wind, let it come. For once, I wasn't the one afraid of the storm. The storm didn't wait long. By Monday morning, the story broke. A headline flashed across my phone before I even reached the office. Stone Holdings under investigation for forgery and financial misrepresentation. I froze on the sidewalk. The article below carried my name in bold. Sources close to the case suggest internal whistleblowing from Tiana Stone, the founder's daughter and former legal associate, may have prompted the inquiry. My pulse thundered in my ears. It hadn't been me, not yet, not officially. But someone had leaked it. And now everything I'd feared was out in the open. Inside the office, whispers followed me like shadows. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, faces caught between curiosity and admiration. Hannah found me by the elevator and pressed a folded newspaper into my hand. You made the front page, she said quietly. You okay? Define okay? Your father's already spinning it, she said. He's calling it a family dispute. Says you're emotionally unstable, trying to sabotage the company. I laughed without humor. Of course he is. The board's panicking, the SEC's moving fast, you need to be careful, T. They'll dig into everything, your emails, your calls, even your personal finances. I've got nothing to hide. Your father does. Her words stayed with me all morning. By noon, the phone rang again. Marcus, I answered, bracing myself. T, he said, voice strained. You need to stop talking to the press. I haven't talked to anyone. They think you have. He's furious. He's blaming me too. Good, he sighed. You don't understand, he's not sleeping. He's drinking again. Last night he smashed his study door. I rubbed my temples. He did worse than that to me, Marcus. He smashed trust. I know, he whispered, but he's still our father. Not mine anymore. Silence. Then, softly, I'll send you something, just don't hang up when you see it. An hour later, an email arrived from his private address. Attached were 2 scanned documents, both titled Internal Memorandum, Priority Access. My eyes caught the header, HZX Loan Adjustment, Transfer of Liability to T. Stone. Buried in the text was a paragraph that made my stomach twist. Pending review of undisclosed financial risks, guarantor status will automatically transfer full repayment responsibility to the secondary signee, T. Stone, effective upon principal's breach. It was a trap, written to activate the moment I withdrew. My father hadn't just forged my name, he'd wired the clause to destroy me if I ever resisted. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The phone rang again. This time, I knew who it was. Tiana, my father said, his voice colder than before. You've made a spectacle of this family. I didn't leak it. Then who did? Maybe someone tired of pretending we're clean. Do you realize what you've done? Years of reputation gone overnight. Reputation built on fraud, I said quietly. He exhaled slowly, the sound like the scrape of a blade. You think you're righteous because you found one clause? You don't know what it takes to keep an empire standing. You call it an empire, I said. I call it rot covered in marble. His tone shifted darker. Walk away, Tiana, withdraw the complaint. I'll fix the documents, settle your share, and make this disappear. And if I do, you'll lose everything. The firm, your license, your credibility, I'll see to it. I swallowed, my hand trembling around the phone. You already took everything that mattered. The rest is just paper. He didn't speak again. The line went dead. By evening, reporters were camped outside my building. Flashbulbs flared when I stepped onto the street, questions firing like bullets. Ms. Stone, are you suing your father? Did you leak the contracts? Do you have evidence of forgery? I said nothing. Elijah's car pulled up and he stepped out, shielding me with his coat as we pushed through the crowd. Inside the car, I finally exhaled. This isn't stopping, I whispered. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. Then we don't stop either. We drove until the city lights fell away, until only the black outline of the water remained beside us. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, streaking the windshield. Elijah pulled over, engine idling. What's next? I send everything to the authorities. No more hiding. He looked at me, eyes steady even through the storm. You're sure? Yes. I took a breath that felt like fire. I won't let him bury me again. When we got home, I compiled everything, the forged signature, Marcus's email, the memos. I wrote a statement of fact, clean and clinical. At the bottom, I typed my name one last time. Tiana Stone, whistleblower and legal guarantor. My hand hovered over the keyboard before I hit send. This time, the signature was mine, real, deliberate, and alive. The email whooshed away into the server, carrying my name toward the people who would finally see it. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. Elijah came to stand behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. Whatever happens, he said, you've already won. I nodded, eyes on the dark horizon. No, I whispered. Not yet. Not until he knows what it feels like to lose control. And somewhere in Boston, my father must have felt it, the first crack in the empire, the tremor in the walls he built to keep everyone beneath him. The reckoning had begun. The next day, the air in Seattle felt different, charged, thin, like everything was holding its breath. I arrived at the office before sunrise, unable to sleep. My inbox was a battlefield of alerts, subpoenas, news inquiries, internal notices from the Bar Association. The investigation had officially begun. Hannah walked in with 2 coffees and a look that hovered between admiration and fear. You're trending, she said, placing 1 cup on my desk. Half the city thinks you're a hero. The other half thinks you're detonating your own bloodline. I smiled faintly. They're both right. She took the chair opposite mine. The SEC confirmed they've received your statement. They'll request a sworn deposition soon. You sure you're ready for this? I was born in a courtroom, I said quietly. Just never thought I'd have to testify against my father. She studied me for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, T, I'm proud of you. That word, proud, hit harder than I expected. By mid-morning, reporters were camped outside the building again. Flashbulbs burst like small explosions every time someone walked out. Security had to escort me through a back exit. As I climbed into the car, Elijah's text appeared on my phone. You okay? I typed back, not really, but I'm still standing. He replied instantly, then that's enough. At noon, my phone rang again. Marcus, I hesitated, then answered. You just made the evening news, he said, his voice low. Dad's furious. He called an emergency board meeting this morning. Good. Tiana, listen, he's collapsing. The investors are pulling out. Mom's begging him to resign before it gets worse. He won't, I said. He's too addicted to control. Marcus exhaled. He's talking about you. Says you're unstable, manipulated, that Elijah put you up to this. I laughed bitterly. Of course he is. When truth doesn't fit his story, he rewrites the characters. He's coming for you, T, legally, personally, all of it. I'm not afraid. Maybe you should be. The call ended. For a long moment, I sat in the car, watching the rain blur the city into silver and gray. I could almost hear my father pacing in his office, the way he did before every negotiation, measured steps, slow breaths, eyes calculating the next move. That night, Elijah found me still working, surrounded by folders and notes. He leaned against the doorway. You haven't eaten, he said. I'm fine. You're shaking. I looked down. My hands were trembling, the adrenaline refusing to fade. It's just the noise, I said. Everywhere I go, they're talking about me. My name in their mouths feels wrong. He came closer, gently taking the pen from my fingers. Let them talk, the truth doesn't need to shout. I wanted to believe that, but my father had built a life on shouting louder than anyone else. At 2 a.m., my phone lit up again, an unknown number from Boston. Against my better judgment, I answered. Tiana. His voice was steady this time, controlled like he'd rehearsed every word. You've made your point. You've embarrassed me. Congratulations. I said nothing. This doesn't end with you winning. The board will bury you in countersuits. Defamation, breach of confidentiality, whatever it takes. You'll spend years defending yourself. You forged my name, I said softly. You turned family into collateral. And you turned loyalty into betrayal, he snapped. Do you have any idea how many people's livelihoods depend on that company? Maybe they should depend on something honest. He laughed, low and cruel. You think honesty builds empires? It doesn't. Power does, and you'll never understand that. I closed my eyes. Then I guess I'll die misunderstanding. His tone hardened. You're not my daughter anymore. There it was, the sentence I knew was coming. It landed not like a knife but like a release. I whispered, then you're not my father. He didn't hang up right away. For a few seconds, all I heard was the sound of his breathing, the same rhythm I used to fall asleep to as a child. Then the line went dead. I sat in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear. The silence afterward was colder than any storm. Elijah found me on the couch, eyes unfocused. He knelt down in front of me. What did he say? I swallowed. He disowned me. Elijah's face softened. Then maybe now you're finally free. I wanted that to be true. I wanted freedom to feel like flight, but instead it felt like falling. 2 days later, Marcus flew to Seattle. He showed up at my door unannounced, rain-soaked and exhausted. I let him in without a word. You look terrible, I said. You look worse, he replied, trying to smile. He pulled a folder from his coat and handed it to me. Inside were copies of transfer documents, proof that my father had liquidated part of the company's assets into offshore accounts under an alias. I found these hidden in his private drive, Marcus said. He's moving money fast. If the investigators don't catch it now, he'll be untouchable. I stared at the documents. You're helping me. I'm helping the truth. He looked at me, eyes tired but clear. And maybe I'm trying to save what's left of us. I reached out and squeezed his hand. Then help me finish this. That night, the three of us, Marcus, Elijah, and I sat around the kitchen table. Folders, drives, statements scattered like battle plans. For the first time, it wasn't about fear. It was about strategy. We mapped out every account, every timeline, every name. The pieces of my father's empire slowly turned into a mosaic of deceit. By dawn, my head ached, but my mind was steady. I looked at my brother and said, "When this is over, you'll have to choose." He nodded. I already did. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first light of morning slipped through the blinds, washing over the papers like quiet fire. For years, I'd lived under my father's shadow. Now I was watching it burn. But deep down, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because empires don't collapse quietly, and neither do the men who build them. The morning of the hearing felt like winter had come early. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and the sky hung low and gray, the kind of gray that made everything feel suspended: time, noise, even breath. Cameras lined the sidewalk, flashes bursting like white fire every few seconds. My name, once whispered behind mahogany doors, was now shouted in headlines. Tiana Stone, the daughter who took down her father. Elijah squeezed my hand before we entered. You don't owe anyone a performance, he said softly. Just the truth, I nodded. The truth is all that's left. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of paper and old wood polish. My father was already there, seated with his attorneys, the same men who used to send me Christmas cards. He looked smaller somehow, though his posture remained immaculate. The once unshakable man who commanded rooms now stared straight ahead, jaw locked, refusing to look at me. Marcus sat a few rows behind him, pale but resolute. Our eyes met briefly, and that was enough, an unspoken truce forged in ruin. The judge entered. The room stood. The air itself seemed to brace. When it was my turn to speak, I rose, palms slightly damp, heart steady in the way fear sometimes makes you. I had rehearsed this testimony 100 times in my head, but standing there, it came out simple, stripped bare. I was raised to believe that loyalty was everything, I began. That to protect family meant to stay silent, but silence can be another kind of crime. I paused, my gaze drifting to my father. When I discovered my signature was forged, I wanted to believe it was a mistake. I wanted to believe he'd fix it once I confronted him. But I learned something that day: power doesn't admit guilt. It only demands obedience. My voice didn't shake. I'm here because I won't be obedient anymore. There was a quiet murmur in the gallery, a ripple of sound that faded quickly when the judge raised a hand. I submitted the documents, the forged contracts, the memos Marcus had recovered, the timestamps, the offshore transfers. Each one felt like a nail closing the coffin of a man who'd once been my world. When I stepped down, Elijah caught my eye from the gallery. His expression was calm, proud, and heartbreakingly gentle. For a moment, I felt anchored. Then my father took the stand. He didn't deny the signature. He didn't deny the documents. Instead, he spoke with the cold precision of a man who believed the world owed him understanding. "I did what I had to," he said. "Every empire, every company, every legacy requires sacrifice. My daughter mistook necessity for betrayal." The prosecutor asked, "And did you forge her name?" He looked directly at me for the first time in months. "I signed for the family," he said, "because she refused to." Gasps filled the room. For a second, I felt something like pity, not for what he'd done, but for how utterly he believed in it. The judge's verdict came 2 weeks later. Stone Holdings was placed under federal supervision. My father faced charges of fraud, falsification of records, and corporate misconduct. Marcus was cleared as a cooperating witness. The press called it the downfall of a dynasty. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, the world was bright again, too bright. The air bit with early autumn chill. Reporters shouted my name, microphones aimed like spears, but their questions blurred into noise. Elijah met me at the bottom of the steps. He didn't say anything at first, he just opened his arms and I walked into them. "It's over," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, it's beginning." We drove to the pier that evening. The water was dark and calm, a mirror for the sky. I leaned against the railing, watching the last traces of sunset fade into indigo. "I thought it would feel different," I said. "Like freedom would be louder." "It's quiet because it's real," Elijah said. "You finally stopped running from what was chasing you." I smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," he said, "but it's worth it." A few weeks later, I packed up the apartment not to escape, but to start over. I took a job with a nonprofit legal group that defended whistleblowers and small business owners, people crushed under the weight of systems like the one my father had built. Sometimes, when I looked out over the Seattle skyline from my new office, I thought about him, not with anger, not even sadness, but with a strange, quiet understanding. He'd built his empire to be remembered. I had torn it down to forget. But in the ashes, I'd found something he never could: peace. One night, I received a message from Marcus. "Mom's moving to Vermont. Dad's appealing the sentence. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you." For the first time, the word didn't hurt. I replied, "You should be proud of yourself, too." When I put the phone down, Elijah walked in, carrying a bottle of wine. "To new beginnings?" he asked. "To truth," I said. We clinked glasses, and the sound was soft, human, the opposite of everything I'd grown up with. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one, scattering across the bay. For years, I'd been afraid of falling out of my father's shadow. But standing there, in that small apartment above the water, I realized something simple, something clean. I hadn't fallen. I'd stepped into the light.